The pain hit me like a sledgehammer to my gut at 3 in the morning, tearing through my abdomen with such violence that I doubled over on my bathroom floor. Blood was pooling beneath me, warm and sticky against the cold tiles. My hands shook as I dialed my parents, gasping through waves of agony. Mom's voice was sharp with annoyance. "Arabella, we cannot deal with your drama tonight. Jessica's gala is tomorrow." Dad grabbed the phone. "You're always being overdramatic. Handle it yourself." The line went dead. Alone and bleeding, I stumbled to my car, vision blurring as I collapsed in the hospital parking lot. I woke up in a hospital bed with tubes snaking from my body, like mechanical vines, my mouth dry as sandpaper. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with an irritating hum that matched the steady beeping of machines monitoring my vital signs. Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 50s with graying temples, sat beside me with a clipboard in her hands. "You're incredibly lucky to be alive," she said, her brown eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Your appendix didn't just rupture. It had been leaking toxins into your bloodstream for days. You were in septic shock when you arrived. A few more hours, and we would have lost you." The words hit me harder than the physical pain radiating through my torso. Days. I had been dying for days while my family obsessed over seating charts and flower arrangements for my sister's charity gala. My mind drifted back to the previous week, replaying moments I had dismissed as typical family dynamics. Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Lake Oswego had been the usual affair. The dining room table gleamed under the crystal chandelier set with Mom's good china that only appeared for special occasions or when Jessica visited. My sister sat at Dad's right hand, her blonde hair perfectly styled even for a casual family meal, discussing the final details of her literacy charity gala. The venue coordinator confirmed we can accommodate 300 guests. Jessica had announced cutting her herb-crusted salmon into precise bites. The silent auction alone should raise over $50,000. I had mentioned feeling unwell, a persistent ache in my lower abdomen that had been bothering me since Thursday. Mom barely glanced up from her wine glass. "Honey, you probably just need more fiber in your diet. Jessica needs us focused right now. This gala could establish her nonprofit as a major player in children's literacy." Dad nodded enthusiastically. "My daughter is going to change the world one book at a time." His chest puffed with pride as he looked at Jessica, the golden child who had never disappointed them. Harvard Law School marriage to Daniel, a successful prosecutor from a prominent Portland family, and now her own charitable foundation. She was everything they had dreamed of in a daughter. I was everything they had settled for. The pattern had established itself early in our lives. Jessica, 3 years older, had been homecoming queen valedictorian student body president. I had been the quiet one in the back row drawing in sketchbooks while she commanded attention on stage. When I graduated from Portland State with my graphic design degree, they missed the ceremony because Jessica had an important court case. When my first art show opened at a small gallery in the Pearl District, they skipped it for Jessica's engagement party. Now, lying in this hospital bed with surgical staples holding my abdomen together, I understood with crystal clarity that their absence during my medical emergency wasn't an oversight or miscommunication. It was a choice. They had genuinely believed I was being dramatic, seeking attention to steal focus from Jessica's big night. My phone sat on the bedside table, the screen dark and silent. 17 missed calls from my workplace at the boutique design agency where I worked downtown. 0 calls from my family, not even a text message asking if I was okay. Nurse Patricia, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and curly red hair escaping from her ponytail, checked my IV drip and medications. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? Any family coming to visit today?" I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in the acoustic panels. "They're busy with my sister's event." Patricia's eyebrows raised slightly. "During your emergency surgery? That's unusual. Most families camp out in our waiting room for hours, even for routine procedures." The weight of her words settled in my chest like lead. Even a stranger found it unusual that my own parents hadn't come while I fought for my life on an operating table. They had chosen Jessica's gala over their daughter's survival, and somehow I wasn't even surprised. The next morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. My phone had finally gained enough charge to function properly, and against my better judgment, I found myself scrolling through Jessica's Instagram account. Each photo felt like a small knife twisting in an already tender wound. There was Mom in a midnight blue evening gown, her silver hair elegantly swept up, standing beside a banner reading, Literacy Champions Gala 2024. Her smile was radiant, the kind of joy I rarely saw unless Jessica was involved. Dad wore his best tuxedo, the one he had bought for Jessica's wedding 3 years ago, his arm around my mother as they posed with other donors. The caption under Jessica's post read, Incredible night raising $87,000 for childhood literacy programs. So grateful for my amazing parents who make everything possible. 843 likes. Dozens of comments praising their family values and community spirit. I scrolled through them with morbid fascination, my thumb moving across the screen despite the pain medication making my movements sluggish. Your family is such an inspiration. Robert and Margaret raised 2 incredible daughters. Family goals right here? I kept scrolling until I found what I was looking for. The comments where guests mentioned me wondering about my absence. Each response from my family members felt like another betrayal. Where's your sister? Haven't seen Arabella in ages. My mother had replied, Oh, she's under the weather but recovering at home. You know how sensitive she can be about minor health issues. Minor health issues. I looked down at the drainage tubes protruding from my abdomen, the IV line feeding antibiotics directly into my bloodstream to fight the infection that had nearly killed me. The surgical staples stretching across my lower belly would leave permanent scars. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Maya's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a rush of relief at seeing a genuinely caring face. Maya had been my college roommate, the one person who had understood my family dynamics from day one. Arabella, I just heard from Jennifer at your office. Emergency surgery. Why didn't you call me? Her voice carried the familiar mix of concern and barely controlled panic that had gotten us through countless college crises together. I tried calling my parents first. I said, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had removed that morning. And they told me I was being dramatic. Jessica's gala was more important. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Maya's voice came back low and furious. They what? I explained the timeline. The escalating pain, the blood, the desperate phone calls, the dismissal, the collapse in the hospital parking lot. Maya listened without interrupting, but I could hear her breathing growing heavier with each detail. Bella, I saw the gala posts. I assumed you chose not to go because you were working on that big project. I had no idea you were literally dying while they were taking glamour shots. Dr. Martinez appeared in my doorway, knocking gently on the frame before entering. How are we feeling today? Pain level. About a 6, I admitted. The medication was helping, but movement still sent sharp reminders through my torso. That's normal for day 2 post-op. You had extensive surgery, Arabella. We removed your appendix, cleaned out the infected tissue, and flushed your abdominal cavity. You were minutes from complete organ failure when you arrived. She consulted her chart. Most patients your age bounce back quickly, but you'll need at least 2 weeks off work and careful monitoring for signs of secondary infection. After she left, Maya was quiet for a moment. Bella, this wasn't dramatic. This was life or death. You could have died alone in that parking lot. The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had nearly died alone because my family couldn't be bothered to take my pain seriously. They were so invested in maintaining Jessica's perfect image that they dismissed my emergency as attention-seeking behavior. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jessica's name appeared, and for a moment hope flickered in my chest. Maybe she had finally realized what had happened. Maybe she cared enough to check on me. Sorry I missed your thing. Heard it was beautiful. I was having surgery. Her response came back within minutes. Drama queen, Mom said you just had stomach flu. The gala raised almost $90,000. Can't wait to tell you all about it. I stared at the message until the words blurred together. Even when confronted directly with the truth, she dismissed it as dramatics. They had created their own version of events and refused to acknowledge any reality that didn't fit their narrative. Maya's voice brought me back to the present. I'm driving down from Seattle this weekend. Don't argue with me about it. You shouldn't be alone right now. As I hung up the phone, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in my 27 years, I could see my family clearly. They weren't neglectful by accident or overwhelmed by circumstances. They had made a conscious choice to prioritize Jessica's event over my life, and when confronted with the consequences of that choice, they had doubled down by rewriting history. The medication was making me drowsy, but before I fell asleep, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the daughter they could ignore, dismiss, and minimize. If they wanted to pretend I didn't matter, I would give them exactly what they wanted. Day 3 in the hospital brought a parade of medical professionals checking my incision, adjusting medications, and monitoring my recovery progress. The infection markers in my blood were finally dropping, and Dr. Martinez seemed cautiously optimistic about my healing trajectory. I was managing to eat solid foods again without nausea, and the constant pain had dulled to a manageable throb. I was picking at a lunch of questionable meatloaf when my parents finally appeared in my doorway. They entered hesitantly as if unsure whether they were welcome, carrying a bouquet of roses that looked suspiciously familiar. These were left over from the centerpieces, Mom explained, setting the flowers on my bedside table without looking directly at me. Jessica thought you might enjoy them. Not Jessica's idea to visit, not their idea to bring fresh flowers specifically for their hospitalized daughter. Leftover decorations from the event that had been more important than my life. Dad shifted uncomfortably near the window, his hands shoved deep in his khaki pockets. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinner, his face lined with stress. How are you feeling, kiddo? The childhood nickname that once made me feel loved now felt hollow and patronizing. Like I nearly died while you were at a party. Mom's face tightened. She wore the expression I remembered from childhood when I had said something that embarrassed her in public. Arabella, you know we would have come if we'd known it was serious. You've always been sensitive about medical issues. Remember when you thought you had appendicitis in high school and it turned out to be gas? I had been 15 and experiencing severe abdominal pain during finals week. They had dismissed it then too, insisting I was just stressed about exams. It had turned out to be a kidney stone, not gas, but they had never acknowledged their mistake or apologized for making me suffer through it alone. This time my appendix actually ruptured. I was in septic shock. The surgeon said I was minutes from organ failure. Dad finally looked at me directly, his blue eyes troubled but defensive. Well, we're here now. You seem to be recovering fine. Kids your age bounce back from these things quickly. You have no idea what recovery entails because you weren't here for any of it. Mom perched on the edge of the visitor chair like she was preparing to flee at any moment. The gala was incredibly stressful, Arabella. You have no idea the pressure we were under. Jessica worked for months planning every detail. The mayor was there, the city council, major donors from throughout Oregon. One small mistake could have ruined everything. Her words hung in the air between us like toxic smoke. The gala had been stressful for them. Planning a party had been more exhausting than their daughter fighting for her life alone. I waited for some acknowledgement of the situation's severity, some recognition of their absence during my emergency, some basic expression of concern for my well-being. Instead, Dad glanced at his watch. Speaking of Jessica, she needs help addressing thank you cards to all the donors. The follow-up is crucial for future fundraising efforts. They had been in my hospital room for exactly 37 minutes. Not even 40 minutes to check on their daughter who had undergone emergency surgery while they celebrated their other daughter's achievements. And they were already making excuses to leave for Jessica's next project. The parking fees here are outrageous, Mom added, gathering her purse. $4 an hour just to visit sick people. It's practically robbery. $4 an hour was too much to spend on visiting their hospitalized daughter. But they had spent hundreds on their formal wear for the gala, thousands on their table sponsorship, and who knew how much on Jessica's elaborate event planning. Nurse Patricia knocked and entered carrying fresh bandages for my dressing change. She took in the scene with professional discretion, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes as she assessed my visitors. "I need to check Arabella's surgical site and change her dressings," Patricia said pleasantly. "It might be more comfortable if family stepped out for a few minutes." "Actually, we should head home anyway," Dad said quickly, clearly relieved to have an excuse to leave. "Jessica is expecting us, and you seem to be doing much better." Mom leaned over to kiss my forehead, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like a social obligation than maternal affection. "Call us if you need anything, honey. Though you'll probably be home in a day or two." They were halfway out the door when Dad turned back. "Oh, and Arabella, try not to worry Jessica with too many details about this. She's already stressed about the wedding planning starting up again, and you know how she absorbs other people's problems. Don't worry Jessica with details about my near-death experience. Protect Jessica from the stress of knowing her sister had almost died while she posed for photos. Make sure Jessica's emotional well-being remained undisturbed by the inconvenient reality of my medical crisis." After they left, Patricia worked silently on my dressings, her touch gentle and professional. When she finished, she met my eyes directly. "Honey, I've been a nurse for 22 years. I've seen families handle medical emergencies in all kinds of ways. But I've never seen parents leave their child's bedside during emergency surgery to attend a social event." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "How you process this experience is entirely up to you, but please know that their behavior isn't normal or acceptable." That night, alone with only the sounds of the hospital around me, I stared out my window at the city lights scattered across Portland's skyline. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably helping Jessica address envelopes discussing seating arrangements for her upcoming wedding, planning the next event in their golden child's perfect life. I thought about Patricia's words. Their behavior wasn't normal or acceptable. For 27 years, I had been making excuses for their favoritism, their dismissal, their emotional absence. I had convinced myself that I was oversensitive, that I expected too much, that their love came in different forms. But nearly dying alone while they celebrated had stripped away all my carefully constructed rationalizations. This wasn't about different expressions of love or varying family dynamics. This was about parents who genuinely valued one daughter's social success more than their other daughter's survival. I reached for my phone and opened my contacts list. Next to my parents' names was the designation emergency contact. I changed it to Maya's number instead. It was a small change, but it felt monumental. I was officially removing them from the position of people I would call in a crisis. It was the first step in a much larger plan that was beginning to form in my mind. 2 weeks later, I returned to my apartment in Southeast Portland, a cozy one-bedroom unit above a vintage bookstore that I had chosen specifically because it felt like the opposite of my parents' pristine Lake Oswego house. The exposed brick walls were covered with my own artwork, colorful abstract pieces that my family had always dismissed as too experimental or not quite ready for display. Maya had driven down from Seattle as promised, arriving with grocery bags full of actual comfort food, not leftover party decorations. She made me soup from scratch, helped me navigate the shower with surgical tape covering my incisions, and spent hours helping me organize the mountain of medical paperwork that had accumulated during my hospital stay. "Look at this," I said, holding up the itemized bill from my emergency surgery. The total was staggering $43,000 before insurance. This is what they thought was me being dramatic. Maya shook her head in disgust. "Did they ever even ask about the cost offer to help with anything?" "They complained about $4 parking fees." I started with social media. I unfollowed my parents and Jessica on all platforms, then adjusted my privacy settings so they couldn't see my posts. I removed them from my Instagram stories and Facebook updates, effectively making myself invisible to them online. Next, I called my bank and removed my parents as emergency contacts on all my accounts. They had never provided financial support as an adult, but their names were still listed from when I had opened my first checking account at 16. I updated my address to reflect my current apartment rather than their house where my mail had been forwarded for years out of habit. At work, I informed Jennifer, my boss at the design agency, that my family was no longer authorized to receive information about my employment or whereabouts. I also asked her to remove them from the company emergency contact list. "Is everything okay?" Jennifer asked, her concern evident. She had sent flowers and visited me in the hospital, showing more care than my own parents had managed. "I'm establishing better boundaries," I said simply. It was easier than explaining the whole truth. The most significant change was my phone number. I had kept the same cell phone number since college, and my family had always been able to reach me instantly. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, I went to the phone store and changed my number entirely, giving the new contact information only to Maya, my workplace, my doctor's office, and a few close friends. For the first time in my adult life, my parents couldn't call me whenever they needed something. Maya was helping me reorganize my closet when she found the letter. It had been tucked inside a sketchbook, forgotten in the emotional whirlwind of the past few weeks. "What's this?" she asked, holding up the sealed envelope addressed to my parents. "Something I wrote in the hospital. I never sent it." "Do you want to send it now?" I considered this carefully. The letter contained everything I wanted to say about their absence, their dismissal of my pain, their decades of prioritizing Jessica over me. It was raw and honest and probably therapeutic to write. "No," I said finally. "They'll just find a way to make themselves the victims. Besides, I'm not looking for an explanation or an apology anymore. I'm looking for peace." Maya nodded approvingly. Sometimes the loudest message is silence. 3 weeks passed without any contact from my family. I stopped attending the weekly Sunday dinners that had been a tradition since childhood, simply not showing up without explanation or excuse. I didn't respond to Jessica's group texts about wedding planning or Mom's forwarded Facebook posts about family recipes. The silence was intoxicating. For the first time since college, I wasn't bracing myself for criticism about my career choices, my apartment, my relationship status, or my failure to live up to Jessica's impossible standard. I wasn't fielding requests to help with Jessica's projects or listening to detailed recaps of her achievements. I was just living my own life. Maya returned to Seattle after her extended visit, but we talked every few days. "How long do you think it'll take them to notice?" she asked during one of our evening calls. "Honestly, they might not notice until Christmas." I was wrong. It took them 4 weeks to realize I had disappeared from their lives, and when they finally did notice, their reaction was exactly what I had predicted. 6 months into my self-imposed exile from family dysfunction, life had taken on a rhythm that felt authentically mine for the first time in years. My artwork was evolving in directions I hadn't explored while constantly seeking approval from people who fundamentally didn't understand or appreciate creative expression. The design agency had promoted me to senior designer, recognizing the quality and innovation in my work that had emerged once I stopped second-guessing every creative instinct. I had also started dating Alex, the owner of the independent bookstore below my apartment. Our relationship had developed naturally, from casual conversations about literature, to coffee dates, to long evenings discussing everything from graphic design theory to obscure poetry collections. Alex was patient, thoughtful, and completely uninterested in my family's social standing or my sister's achievements. For the first time in my life, I was valued for who I was, rather than measured against someone else's accomplishments. The peace was interrupted on a crisp October morning when my cousin Lauren called. Lauren lived in Denver and worked as a trauma nurse at Presbyterian Medical Center. We had been close as children but had drifted apart as adults, maintaining contact, mainly through social media likes and holiday cards. "Arabella, I need to talk to you about what's happening with your parents and Jessica," Lauren said without preamble. "I've been hearing some concerning things from the family." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" "According to your mom, you've cut off all contact with them for no reason. She's telling everyone that you had minor surgery back in the spring and have been holding a grudge ever since. Your dad says you're going through some kind of difficult phase and won't respond to their attempts to reconcile." I set down my coffee cup, carefully processing this information. They had crafted a narrative where I was the unreasonable one, the daughter who had inexplicably turned against her loving family over a minor medical procedure. What exactly did they tell you happened? I asked. Your mom said you had your appendix out routine surgery and that they visited you in the hospital, but then you just disappeared. Stopped coming to family dinners, changed your phone number, won't return calls or texts. She's really worried about you. The manipulation was breathtaking in its completeness. They had taken the facts: appendix surgery, hospital stay, changed phone number, and rearranged them to support their version of events. In their story, they were the concerned parents trying to reach their troubled daughter. My near-death experience had been reduced to routine surgery. Their absence during my emergency had been rewritten as a supportive hospital visit. Lauren, can I tell you what actually happened? I asked. I walked her through the real timeline. The emergency call at 3 in the morning. Their dismissal of my pain as attention-seeking behavior. Driving myself to the hospital while bleeding internally. Undergoing emergency surgery alone while they posed for photos at Jessica's gala. Their 40-minute hospital visit focused on their own stress and Jessica's needs. The silence on Lauren's end stretched so long that I wondered if the connection had failed. Jesus, Bella, she finally whispered. I'm a trauma nurse. I see appendix cases regularly. When you say septic shock. Dr. Martinez said I was minutes from organ failure. That's life or death. That's not routine surgery, that's emergency intervention to save your life. Her voice was tight with professional outrage. And they weren't there. They chose Jessica's charity gala instead. Lauren was quiet for another moment, processing the implications. No wonder you cut contact. I would have done the same thing. She went on to explain what the extended family had been told. According to my parents, I was being ungrateful and dramatic, punishing them for some imagined slight. Jessica's wedding planning was apparently being complicated by my absence, and my parents were playing the role of long-suffering caregivers, dealing with their younger daughter's inexplicable hostility. Your cousin Michael asked if maybe you were having a mental health crisis, Lauren said. Your Aunt Sandra suggested intervention. They're all convinced you're being irrational. The family narrative had been so effectively crafted that relatives were considering staging an intervention to force me back into contact with parents who had abandoned me during a medical emergency. It was manipulation on a scale I hadn't fully appreciated. What do you want me to tell them? Lauren asked. Nothing, I said. Let them keep their story. I'm not interested in convincing anyone of the truth. But Bella, this affects your reputation within the family. People are starting to think you're unstable. I considered this. For most of my life, I would have been devastated by the thought that extended family members questioned my mental health or viewed me as unreasonable. The need for approval and acceptance had driven so many of my decisions. But something had fundamentally shifted during those hours alone in the hospital. The worst thing that could happen, nearly dying while the people who claimed to love me chose a party instead, had already occurred. Their opinions about my response to their abandonment simply didn't matter anymore. Lauren, I almost died alone because my parents couldn't be bothered to take my emergency seriously. That's not an opinion or interpretation. It's documented medical fact. If the family chooses to believe their version over reality, that tells me everything I need to know about where I stand with all of you. Lauren sighed. You're right. I'm sorry I even questioned it. I just wanted to make sure you were okay and see if there was anything I could do to help. After we hung up, I sat in my sun-filled apartment looking at the artwork covering my walls. 6 months of genuine peace had been worth more than 27 years of trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. Alex knocked on my door carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop downstairs, and I realized that I had built a life surrounded by people who actually cared about my well-being. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, the first direct contact in months. Mom and Dad are really hurt by your behavior. This silent treatment is cruel and immature. Call them. I deleted the message without responding. I had learned that engaging with their manipulation only provided ammunition for their victim narrative. Silence, as Maya had said, was sometimes the loudest message. That evening, as Alex and I cooked dinner together in my small kitchen, I felt grateful for the clarity that had come from nearly losing everything. I had discovered the difference between family and people who merely shared my genetics. The people who showed up during emergencies, who celebrated my successes without competition, who valued my happiness over their own convenience, those were the relationships worth nurturing. 1 year after my emergency surgery, life had blossomed in ways I couldn't have imagined while trapped in my family's dysfunctional orbit. My relationship with Alex had deepened into something stable and nurturing. We were discussing moving in together, combining our lives in the same organic way our relationship had developed. My art was being featured in galleries throughout Portland, and I had started taking on freelance projects that challenged my creativity rather than just paying bills. The morning of Jessica's rescheduled wedding, originally planned for last October, but postponed due to venue conflicts, I was sipping coffee in my favorite cafe when my phone rang. Lauren's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with curiosity rather than dread. "Bella, something's happened. Your mom collapsed this morning." The words hit me with unexpected force despite everything that had transpired. Margaret was still my mother regardless of her failures during my crisis. "What kind of collapse?" "Massive heart attack. She's in surgery at OHSU right now. Your dad and Jessica are there, but—" Lauren paused significantly. "They can't reach you. Your old number is disconnected, and apparently you've blocked them on social media. Jessica called me in a panic asking for your contact information." The irony was staggering. Margaret was experiencing exactly what I had endured: emergency surgery while family members couldn't be reached. The difference was that her family was frantically trying to contact the missing person, while mine had chosen to attend a party instead. "How serious is it?" I asked. "From what your dad told my mom, it's touch and go. The cardiac surgeon said it was a massive anterior wall MI. She's going to need extensive intervention if she survives the initial repair." I thought about the day of Jessica's original wedding now, exactly 1 year ago. Margaret collapsing at the venue during setup, still wearing the mother-of-the-bride dress she had spent months selecting. Jessica's wedding dress abandoned at the church while they rushed to the emergency room. The poetic justice of the situation wasn't lost on me, but it brought no satisfaction. "Are you going to call them?" Lauren asked gently. I considered this carefully. 6 months ago, I might have rushed to the hospital, immediately reverting to old patterns of trying to prove my worth through crisis response. But I had spent a year learning that my value wasn't determined by my availability during their emergencies, especially when they had been unavailable during mine. "I'll think about it," I said honestly. Alex found me an hour later sitting in my apartment, staring out the window at the autumn leaves scattered across the courtyard. I explained the situation, the parallel circumstances, the complicated emotions swirling through my chest. "What does your gut tell you?" Alex asked, settling beside me on the couch. "That this doesn't erase what they did to me, but also that I'm not the kind of person who abandons family members during medical emergencies, even when they've abandoned me." "So what do you want to do?" I spent the day wrestling with the decision. By evening, Lauren called with an update. Margaret had survived the initial surgery, but would need months of recovery and cardiac rehabilitation. The heart attack had been severe enough to cause permanent damage, fundamentally altering her health and capabilities. "Your dad called my mom again," Lauren said. "He's desperate to reach you. Apparently Jessica is falling apart and they need family support during the recovery process." The family that had been too busy for my recovery now needed support during theirs. The parents who had found my emergency inconvenient were discovering how terrifying it felt to face medical crisis without full family backup. That night I sat down and wrote a letter. Not the angry screed I had composed in the hospital, but a measured explanation of my absence and my boundaries. I addressed it to my father since he seemed to be the one making the most effort to reach me. In the letter, I detailed the night of my emergency surgery without editorializing or expressing anger. I simply presented the facts: the pain, the dismissal, the near-death experience, their absence during surgery, their brief hospital visit focused on their own needs. I explained that my silence wasn't punishment, but self-preservation. I wished Margaret well in her recovery and expressed hope that they would learn from this experience what it truly meant to support family during medical crises. I didn't include my new contact information. I didn't offer to visit or provide ongoing support. I simply explained my absence and left the door open for future contact if they demonstrated genuine change rather than crisis-driven panic. I mailed the letter to their house the next morning. Whether they would read it with open minds or find new ways to cast themselves as victims remained to be seen. But I had said what needed to be said on my terms without compromising the boundaries that had given me a year of peace. The ball was now in their court, and for the first time in my life I was genuinely indifferent to how they chose to play it. Margaret survived her heart surgery, but the recovery process was grueling and humbling in ways that fundamentally altered her perspective. According to Lauren, who had become my unofficial liaison to family news, the cardiac rehabilitation required months of careful monitoring dietary changes and gradual activity increases. For a woman who had spent decades managing other people's lives and maintaining rigid control over family dynamics, the vulnerability was overwhelming. 3 weeks after Margaret's surgery, I received a phone call from an unexpected source. Jessica's voice was barely recognizable when I answered the unknown number, stripped of its usual confidence and self-assurance. "Arabella, please don't hang up." I said nothing, waiting to see what approach she would take. Apology, manipulation, or guilt trip. "I read your letter. Dad showed it to me while Mom was still in the ICU. Her voice cracked. "I had no idea what really happened the night of my gala." Still, I remained silent. I had learned that premature forgiveness only enabled continued dysfunction. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did our parents really dismiss your emergency call because of my event?" "Yes." "And you drove yourself to the hospital bleeding internally?" "Yes." "And you nearly died in surgery while we were taking photos and giving speeches?" "Yes." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of Jessica's belated understanding. When she finally spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "Oh my God, Bella, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." For the first time in our adult relationship, Jessica sounded genuinely remorseful rather than defensive. But apologies, I had learned, were meaningless without changed behavior. "What exactly are you sorry for?" I asked. "For not taking your pain seriously. For assuming you were being dramatic. For being so focused on my own event that I didn't question why my sister was missing from such an important night. For letting them make you feel like your life didn't matter as much as my party." It was more self-awareness than Jessica had demonstrated in 30 years of sibling interactions. But words were easy. Change was difficult. "Jessica, do you understand why I've had no contact with any of you for over a year?" "Because we failed you when you needed us most. Because we've always failed you." She paused, gathering courage. "Because I've been complicit in treating you like you matter less than me." "And what are you planning to do with that understanding?" "I want to try to make things right. Not just apologize, but actually change how I interact with you and how I allow Mom and Dad to treat you. I want to understand why I've been so blind to their favoritism for so long." I considered her words carefully. Jessica was 30 years old, finally acknowledging dynamics that had been obvious to me since childhood. The question was whether this crisis-induced insight would translate into lasting change or fade once the immediate emergency passed. "I appreciate your apology," I said finally, "but I'm not ready to resume a relationship based on good intentions. If you want to rebuild trust with me, it's going to take consistent action over time, not just words during a family emergency." "I understand. Could we start small, maybe coffee sometime when you feel ready?" "Maybe, but Jessica, I need you to understand that my boundaries with Mom and Dad are permanent. I'm not coming back to family dinners or holidays or pretending everything is fine. My silence isn't a punishment that ends when they learn their lesson. It's self-protection that continues as long as necessary." "I get it, and I won't try to pressure you into changing your mind." 2 months later, Margaret was well enough to return home from cardiac rehabilitation. According to Lauren, the experience had been profoundly humbling. The woman who had spent decades managing everyone else's lives was now dependent on others for basic activities. She needed help with grocery shopping, driving to medical appointments, and managing multiple medications. More significantly, The terror of facing mortality alone. Robert had been in the hospital cafeteria when she arrested during surgery, had given her a visceral understanding of what I had experienced. For the first time in her life, Margaret understood what it felt like to need family desperately and not have them immediately available. Robert attempted to call my workplace several times, begging Jennifer for my contact information. When that failed, he started showing up at the bookstore below my apartment, asking Alex to deliver messages. I instructed Alex to tell him that any communication needed to go through written correspondence sent to my home address. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, written in Robert's careful handwriting on his business letterhead. "Dear Arabella," it began. "I have read your letter multiple times, and I'm beginning to understand the magnitude of our failure as parents during your medical emergency. I cannot undo our absence when you needed us most, but I want you to know that we now comprehend how terrifying and devastating that experience must have been. Margaret's heart attack has taught us what it feels like to face medical crisis with fear and uncertainty. We should have been there for you the way we needed you to be there for us. I know we have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I hope someday you might be willing to give us another chance to be the parents you deserved from the beginning." It was signed simply Dad, with his phone number written below in case I was ready to talk. I showed the letter to Alex, who read it thoughtfully. "What do you think? Does it seem genuine?" "It seems like people who finally understand consequences. Whether that translates to lasting change or just temporary remorse remains to be seen." 3 months later, Jessica appeared at my apartment door. Not called ahead, not sent a text, just showed up on a Saturday morning carrying a small wrapped package. "I know you said we should start small," she said when I answered the door. "I brought something I thought you should have." Inside the package was a framed photo I had never seen before. It showed the two of us as children, maybe 8 and 11 years old, building a blanket fort in my bedroom. We were both laughing, completely absorbed in our shared project, looking genuinely happy together. I found this in Mom's photo albums while I was helping organize her medical paperwork. I realized I couldn't remember the last time we just enjoyed each other's company without competition or comparison. I studied the photo, remembering that afternoon. We had spent hours constructing an elaborate fort, telling stories and sharing secrets. It had been before high school social dynamics divided us into different categories, before college achievements created permanent hierarchies, before adult successes established our relative worth in our parents' eyes. "I miss that," Jessica said quietly. "I miss having a sister." "You always had a sister. You just preferred having an audience." She winced but didn't argue. "You're right. I got so used to being the center of attention that I forgot you existed as anything other than a supporting character in my story." We talked for an hour on my front steps, carefully avoiding topics that might trigger old patterns. When she left, I found myself hopeful for the first time that Jessica might actually be capable of growth. 6 months later, I was hanging my latest painting in a group show at a downtown gallery when my phone rang. Unknown number, Oregon area code. "Hello, Arabella, this is your father." My first instinct was to hang up immediately, but something in his voice, uncertainty, vulnerability, made me hesitate. "I wanted to call and tell you that your mother and I have started counseling. Family therapy specifically focused on understanding how our favoritism toward Jessica damaged our relationship with you." I said nothing, but I didn't hang up. "The therapist helped us see that we've spent your entire life making you compete for love that should have been unconditional. We turned your childhood into a contest where Jessica always won and you always lost. And when you nearly died, we were so invested in maintaining Jessica's perfect moment that we couldn't see your genuine emergency." "Robert," I said, using his first name deliberately, "what do you want from this conversation?" "I want to acknowledge that we failed you completely. I want you to know that we're trying to understand how our behavior affected you. And I want to ask if there's any possibility that someday, with a lot of work and change on our part, we might earn another chance to be your parents." "You've always been my parents," I said. "The question is whether you can learn to be good parents." 1 year later, I attended my first family gathering in 3 years. Not Sunday dinner at their house with all its loaded traditions, but a neutral restaurant where Jessica was celebrating a work promotion. Margaret looked older, frailer, but when she hugged me hello, it felt different. Less performative, more genuine. The conversation was careful but real. Nobody pretended the past hadn't happened, but nobody dwelt on it either. Robert asked thoughtful questions about my art career without comparing it to Jessica's achievements. Margaret listened when I spoke without immediately redirecting attention to Jessica's life. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect. But it was honest, and that was more than I had ever hoped for. Driving home that night, Alex asked how it felt to be back in contact with my family. Different, I said. They're different. Or maybe I'm different, but it doesn't feel like walking back into the same old dysfunction. Think you'll go to the next family event? Maybe. If they keep doing the work to change, I'm willing to slowly rebuild. But if they slide back into old patterns, I have no problem walking away again. The most important lesson from my year of silence wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about understanding that love without respect isn't really love at all. My parents had spent decades claiming to love me, while consistently demonstrating that my needs, feelings, and even my survival were less important than maintaining Jessica's happiness. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is remove yourself from harmful relationships. And sometimes if people are genuinely willing to change, silence can teach what words never could. The phone that remained silent during their emergency taught them what my desperate calls during my emergency should have meant. They learned that family isn't about obligation or convenience. It's about showing up when it matters, even when it's difficult, even when it disrupts your plans, even when the person needing you isn't the one who usually gets your attention. And I learned that my worth isn't determined by other people's recognition. I built a life filled with people who value me for who I am, not what I achieve or how little trouble I cause. That life is mine to protect, and I'll never again compromise my well-being to accommodate other people's dysfunction. The scars from my emergency surgery have faded but never disappeared. They remind me every day that I am strong enough to survive abandonment, creative enough to build new relationships, and wise enough to know the difference between family and people who merely share my genetics. What's your relationship with family boundaries? Have you ever had to step away from family members to protect your own well-being? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that their boundaries matter too. Thank you for listening to my story, and for supporting authentic storytelling that doesn't shy away from difficult truths. I hope wherever you are in your own family journey, you remember that your well-being matters, and you deserve relationships that honor your worth. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.